Medicaid can be a financial lifesaver when it comes to long-term care, but it's also one of the most complex and misunderstood systems out there. I'm Shanna Siegel, an elder law attorney with over 30 years of experience helping families navigate aging, care planning, and Medicaid eligibility. In this video, I'll walk you through the basics, what Medicaid covers, how eligibility works, and what you need to watch out for when planning for care. So first, what is Medicaid? Medicaid is a government program that was designed for individuals with limited income and resources. However, because Medicaid is one of the only programs that does cover long-term care, nursing home, assisted living expenses, it is often used for that purpose, and many individuals who need long-term care find themselves ending up on Medicaid. Medicaid is administered by the states, even though it's a partially federal program, and so the rules are very different state to state. So you really have to learn about what your state provides. I practice predominantly in New Jersey, although I also help clients in New York and Pennsylvania. As an example, in New Jersey, we have some very major differences from the states that are right around us, New York and Pennsylvania. For instance, in New York, you can get 24-hour care at home, which you cannot get here in New Jersey. In Pennsylvania and New York, they have rules that allow spouses to keep their qualified retirement accounts, which we don't have here in New Jersey. But in New Jersey, we cover assisted livings. So as you can see, it can be really different. So you have to learn about your particular state. People are often surprised that Medicaid is the primary payer for long-term care. Medicare doesn't provide much care, and we'll talk about that more later. So as I mentioned, Medicaid is a program for individuals with limited means, but it doesn't mean that you have to have a really low income in order to qualify. A lot of people think that, and it's a misunderstanding. In fact, I have clients who might have $4,000 or $5,000 in monthly income, and they can still be Medicaid eligible. So the second thing we're going to talk about is Medicare versus Medicaid, as a lot of people get those things confused. Medicaid, as I said before, is a program that is meant for individuals with limited income, and it covers long-term care in practically any setting. Medicare, on the other hand, is the program that individuals are eligible for when they hit a certain age and or if they are disabled. So it is available to many individuals. However, there's very limited coverage for long-term care. Generally, only for short-term does Medicare cover, like if you need rehab after being hospitalized. Because of that, we find that many individuals may start their long-term journey on Medicare, but ultimately will move over to Medicaid, that they have to spend a lot of their assets first, and that's where the planning can come in. Some individuals are eligible for both Medicare and Medicaid, and in fact, most of my clients who end up on Medicaid are also Medicare recipients. So they can still have Medicare covering their doctor's appointments, their hospitalizations, all of that, but get the benefit of Medicaid for their long-term care needs. I have a separate video on Medicare, so if you're interested in finding out more about what Medicare covers and doesn't cover, click on the top right and you'll see it there. So 3, why does long-term care planning matter? It's important to understand that nursing homes can cost $10, $15, even more $1,000 per month. So you can see how you could really deplete your savings fairly quickly. So there's a lot of planning that goes into how do we make sure that you can pass on a legacy? How do you protect your spouse if one member of the couple needs long-term care? And how do we make sure that we have the things that we need taken care of? So for instance, funeral or things like that. So it can be really important to plan ahead of time in order to be able to achieve the goals that you wish. It's so important to educate yourself because often families don't know that they need to have private pay funds to be able to enter a facility, and they'll often spend all of their assets at home and then think that they can get Medicaid coverage in a facility. I've also had clients come to me and they've spent a lot of the assets not realizing that we would have been able to protect those assets either for a spouse or for a child with a disability, or in some situations, even for non-disabled children, just being able to satisfy a legacy for their family members. There are a lot of planning techniques that are available, but a lot of them require advanced planning. So it's important when you first get a diagnosis or you first realize there's going to be a need for long-term care to contact an attorney who can help you with your planning needs. 4, Medicaid eligibility rules. In terms of Medicaid eligibility, there's a number of factors. There's both financial eligibility and medical eligibility. For medical eligibility for long-term care Medicaid, you need to require the assistance of an individual with 3 of your basic activities of daily living. A lot of times people don't realize that, and they think that just because you need long-term care, just because you're in an assisted living, that you would qualify for Medicaid, and that's not necessarily true. On the financial side, there are income rules, and depending on your state, there may be some limitations on your income, but they are not as onerous as one might think. So as I said before, you might have $4,000 or $5,000 in income between Social Security and pension, and that's okay. That doesn't mean that you're not ineligible for Medicaid. The asset rules are the biggest issue. An individual is not eligible for Medicaid, in New Jersey at least, until they have under $2,000. So you can see how planning ahead is important, or else you're going to end up spending all of your assets down to $2,000. There are spousal protections that are available that are going to allow your spouse to keep some assets, but they are not as generous as one would hope. So often we have to engage other planning tools to protect the spouse fully. A lot of clients come to me and they're shocked to find out that the spouse's finances are also considered. So while they think they may be able to keep all of their savings, that's not the case. Medicaid's going to look at both spouses' assets together. And that can be a real shock, but we can address some of those issues through our planning. Another thing that people aren't always prepared for is what we call the 5-year look back. Medicaid looks back at all transactions that an individual has engaged in for 5 years prior to their Medicaid eligibility. So that means that if you helped a family member out, or you paid for a wedding, or you and your child just maybe kind of commingled your assets in one bank account, those can all be major issues for Medicaid. One of the things that we can really help with is figuring out what can be addressed, what can be cured, and how to address those things that happened in the prior 5 years. It's important to understand that your retirement assets, your life insurance, all of your assets can be counted for Medicaid purposes in certain situations. Your house is an exempt resource, but we still can sometimes do some planning to make sure that there isn't a lien placed on it for later. 5, what you're allowed to keep. Not every resource is counted for Medicaid purposes. So for instance, your home or your car would be exempt. Also, you can do certain funeral planning ahead of time. But just because your house is exempt doesn't mean that planning doesn't make sense for it. In certain situations, Medicaid would place a lien on your home, and we can avoid that by transferring it out of your name and perhaps into a spouse's name. There's a lot of options that are available in protecting a home, but some of them require doing it 5 years ahead of time. So again, really important to consider these issues ahead of time and plan so that you can keep all of your options available. A spouse does have certain protections. Their income is protected, and we can often protect a fair amount of resources for the spouse through a number of planning techniques. The rules that apply to an applicant and their spouse are different from state to state. So it's important to understand what exemptions your state allows before you make application for Medicaid. 6, why you shouldn't do this alone. Medicaid is complex. I mean, we've talked a bit about the rules and how they can vary from state to state, and when a house might be protected, but it still could be subject to a lien. There's a lot to understand, and the rules are always changing. And there are certain public policy exceptions which you might not be aware of that might allow you to protect your home or other assets in certain situations for a disabled child or a child who has been a caretaker. So it's really important to work with a professional who's familiar with all the rules, how they're being applied in your state, and even county to county there can be differences. When you make application for Medicaid, a caseworker is going to review your file, and they're going to pretty quickly make a request for additional information, and they can make a denial pretty quickly. So you really want to know ahead of time what kind of things they're looking for to make sure that your application is complete and you don't make a mistake that's going to end up with a denial. Working with an elder law attorney can help you avoid those costly mistakes and can sometimes save you a lot of money that you didn't know you were eligible to be saved. I once had a client come to me who had already completed their application and received a denial. And when I looked back at all of the information, I realized that they had not been told by the facility that they were eligible for something called the disabled child exemption. And that allowed certain assets to be transferred to the child who was disabled instead of having to be part of the spend down. Now, I wasn't able to help this person get those assets back. They had already been spent at the facility. And it was really unfortunate that they weren't aware of how they could protect those assets. So again, working with an attorney ahead of time, it's going to save you a lot of headaches, dealing with a lot of stress and burden, and potentially save you a lot of money. If you found this helpful, be sure to check out the other Aging Answers videos and subscribe for more practical guidance. And if you have a question, or if you've been through the Medicaid process yourself, leave a comment below. Your insight might just help someone else going through the same thing. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you the next time.